you need to get all of the information in front of you first. There may be a need for your own pathologist to review the medical records to see if they are consistent with what our client is telling us or not. So those are some of the things you might want to take a look at before you get started.
And when you said have a conversation with prosecutors, you mean if you look at the case and it looks really bad, then you have a conversation with your client about possibly taking a plea deal?
Yeah, and I think before you do that, in this case, I would want to have my client evaluated by medical professionals to see if there's any type of mental health issues involved here. There may be some levels of stress within her life or her relationship or something, and you might want to have someone take a long, hard look at her to see what is going on inside. Because if these allegations are accurate, this is someone who really has some issues going on mentally. And I think once that is accomplished, when we see what's going on, if there's a mental health diagnosis, then I would meet with prosecutors and try to work the case out in some fashion.
Let's expand upon that. I did a quick research under Utah law, and I saw that it says it is a defense to a prosecution under any statute or ordinance that the defendant, as a result of a mental condition, lacked the mental state required as an element of the offense charged. I then took that and then I looked at the six aggravated child abuse charges that she faces, and there is an intentionally or knowingly component to each one of those. What could be a potential mental defect that she had where she didn't realize this is child abuse or didn't intend for this to be child abuse? Am I thinking about that the right way?
Generally speaking, for someone to be what we refer to as criminally insane, you have to have a diagnosis so that as a result of your mental health defect, you do not understand the difference between right and wrong. For you to be completely acquitted due to your insanity, criminal insanity, you have to have that mental defect. I'm assuming Utah law is the same way. That's how it is here in Pennsylvania. And what law enforcement would look to kind of combat that defense would be, what steps did a criminal defendant take to in any way try to cover up what their criminality was at the time they were committing these acts? Because if you're starting to cover up, even in the slightest opportunity, cover up what you did, hide what you did, that's evidence that you know right from wrong. Because you know what you did was wrong, and you don't want anybody to find out about it. So I think you'd have to rise to that level to present a mental health defense at a trial.
Let me tell you what I think makes that tricky, and I'm curious your thoughts on it. So before she was even arrested, we know that the Department of Family and Child Services had been contacted. We know they visited the home. We know that Ruby Franke understood she was receiving a ton of criticism online about her parenting techniques. She always doubled down from what we saw, saying, she was shocked by this allegations that she was an abuser or neglectful of the children. It's about taking responsibility. So it always seemed to me that she, at least in public, has been doubling down on her parenting style. And if, DCFS, whatever reason, they didn't find any evidence of abuse, can she say, listen, obviously I never thought anything that I was doing was wrong. People have different parenting techniques. I was shocked that I was arrested for this. I say that because what's complicating, I just interviewed Kevin Franke's attorney. Kevin Franke is Ruby Franke's husband. And he said, if I understood it correctly, that Kevin had a call with Ruby right before she was arrested saying she knew that law enforcement was coming and that he wanted her to take care of the kids. So it's always that prime example. If someone commits a crime and just is hanging out and then the police come and they're totally confused, that's like really insane. Like you didn't know what you were doing was illegal whatsoever. But here, if she had the understanding that people were looking into her, she was being criticized, the police were on their way, does that complicate the mental health defense?
I think it does. And let's just use these facts as an example. Let's assume that when she's confronted initially, whether it be in this circumstance or as you were talking about prior occasions, and there's evidence of abuse, and she says, well, the family dog told me not to give my children food for 7 days and then duct tape their hands and lock them in a closet. And our dog has been telling me that for years to do that. And so I did it. And she doesn't hide anything. And then she's evaluated and she sees that she has that mental defect where she's listening to the family dog. But we don't have that here. We have a woman, as you said, has been doubling down on how great of a parent she's been. She knows what it is to be a good parent, and she knows what it is to be abusive. That's obvious from the facts of this case. It's obvious from her history in these circumstances. So I would say that there's no opportunity to present a mental health defense at a trial. I think the only mental health issue that can be utilized in this case would be for mitigation purposes, for plea negotiations, for sentencing purposes. I think you start that process now, and I think that's the best way to resolve the case.
The likelihood that she points the finger at Jody. So in other words, I didn't know what was going on, but these kids were found at Jody's house. Police have indicated that Ruby had filmed a video with Jody, I believe, 2 days prior to this. So they said she would have had the knowledge that this abuse was going on. She is charged with not only inflicting the abuse of herself on these kids, but allowing it to happen, causing someone else to do it as well. It's quite broad with what she's charged with. And, you know, also the idea that you put it all on Jody Hildebrandt and you didn't know what was going on, I believe might also be complicated by the fact that, according to the police, when they arrived, instead of Ruby Franke immediately saying, "What's going on? I didn't do this," she immediately lawyered up. And you couple that with the idea she knew the police were coming based on my conversation with Kevin Franke's attorney. It just seems like she had the knowledge, right? Do you think she's going to say at any point she had no idea what was going on to her kids?
Well, let's think that through now, okay? So Let's assume this case is in front of a jury, and most people who would be sitting on the jury have children, maybe have grandchildren. So this is not a bank robbery case or something where you're going to point the finger at your co-defendant. If she goes down that road and tries to point the finger at another person that we know she was in the house 2 days before that, people on the jury just will immediately look at her and say, how can you let your children go to a place where you don't know what's going on inside that house, where you were in that house 2 days prior? She's going to look like a monster trying to do something like that, in my opinion. Look, I've raised 4 children. I have 2 grandchildren. And when my children were young, if they were out of my sight, I knew exactly where they were, who they were with, what they were doing, what time they were coming home, how they were getting home. And everybody on the jury is going to be the same way, who have raised children, who have been mothers and fathers. So you can't go down that road. I think that would be absolutely ridiculous.